On my left is Dr. Katie Flynn, who is a new addition to the USEF staff. Well, not so new anymore, but specializing in heading up the biosecurity initiatives of USEF and being part of the veterinary department with Dr. Stephen Schumacher. So I think today will be a great presentation and an interaction with all of you. But before we get to that, I just want to acknowledge that this year is the 20th anniversary of the creation of the United States Equestrian Federation. So 20 years ago, what people called the war ended. U.S. Equestrian Federation was created and designated the national governing body for equestrian sport. And our first convention was held in Los Angeles, California. And if you remember back there, is David O'Connor here with us this morning? Wherever he must be outside. He was the first president of United States Equestrian Federation back in those days and was I guess the peacemaker is how we dubbed him at that time. But if you were with us at that convention, you might have remembered David's birthday present from his wife, which was Marilyn Monroe impersonator singing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President." He was petrified that it was not going to be appropriate, yet it was very appropriate, very above board. So anyway, congratulations, U.S. Equestrian Federation, on 20 years. We have a great week planned for you, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Katie Flynn, and she's going to begin today's program.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you. All right. So we're here to talk about biosecurity, and the veterinary department really thanks the opportunity for doing this today and allowing us to have a conversation. This is not just me up here talking, but having a conversation. Because I would like to share some of my experience in equine health and biosecurity, as that is really what I am here and hired by the Federation to do. And we are excited to have this conversation, and Dr. Schumacher is very excited to defer all equine health and biosecurity questions to me. So those of you that ask him a question, his answer is going to be, I defer to Dr. Flynn. So that is his role today. All joking aside, we really appreciate the opportunity, though, to kind of have a conversation about how we are going to protect not just our equine athletes, but our competitions. How do we keep competitions going in light of disease and disease outbreaks? First, we'd like to thank BioPlanet, and we'll get into their products and Merck here a little bit later. And we're going to start by just giving you two questions that I hope we can answer by the end of today. Are our equine competitions at risk for a disease outbreak? Yes. Thank you. I don't have to talk anymore. There we go. Just kidding. The second part of this, and this I hope you have a little bit more in-depth conversation about than just a yes. How do we prevent and control disease outbreaks at our competitions? That's really what we're here to talk about today, so that we can all work together, because it's not just the exhibitors, it's not just the competition management, it's not just the Federation. We all have to work together on accomplishing this. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on some biosecurity concepts and some disease situations before we get into the workshop part of this, where you will have a scenario and you will have to solve the problems at an event. But we need to think about how this all happens, and is there a risk, and what are risks for diseases introduced into a showgrounds, and how that disease can be spread around a showgrounds. There's a lot of factors that go into disease spread. There's a lot of risks at our showgrounds, whether it's the people coming in, the animals coming in, the equipment coming in, the feed trucks coming in, the hay, the grains. Everything that comes in has the potential to bring in something with it. Bring in a virus, bring in a bacteria, bring in a fungus. So we have to understand what those risks are for introduction. And then we have to think about, once it's in the facility, How does it get moved around? How does that virus move? What does that bacteria jump on, basically, and get carried around the facility? There's 3 components to this that we have to think about. 1 is the horse and the competitor. 2 is actually the virus or bacteria, the pathogen. And 3 is the environment. You can't just address one. If there's a disease outbreak, you can't just say, I'm going to go and test all the horses and that's all I have to do. If there's a disease outbreak, there's no way, just so everyone's clear on this, there is no way to completely eliminate all pathogens. So we will always have risk. So we have to work within this triangle to address our disease control as well as our prevention steps. So I like to look at it as a disease outbreak is really the perfect storm. And really what happens is a disease agent comes in, and because we have horses that move around, and we have people that move around, and we have equipment that moves around, we're moving that disease agent around. Once we move that disease agent around, we have to think about the environment, the wind, the water. All of that can move that pathogen around the facility. And then we have our stressed or naive horses that are congregating and commingling at the event. So the more virus or bacteria that comes in, the more ways it's spread, more people moving, more horses moving, more equipment moving, the more exposure, the more potential for a larger outbreak. And this is the cascade every time. And when you don't control that cascade, you have a big disease outbreak. And what is our risk factors? What are our risk factors as a USEF in our competitions? And I thank the compliance department for giving us these data. So we have 2,100 competitions with an average of 189 horses. But the more horses you congregate, the higher risk. And we have 55 competitions that have more than 1,000 horses. And when we think about the disease and the pathogens, once your horse is exposed to that disease pathogen, it incubates that. And what that means is the incubation time is from the time of exposure to the time that horse shows clinical signs. And that can be anywhere from 3 to 7 days. And when we think about that 3 to 7 days, the longer horses are on the showgrounds, that means the longer that horse is exposing other horses. So when we think about those disease or events that are longer than 10 days, we're already going into a second incubation period. We're already transmitting that virus or bacteria around the facility. And we have 57 facilities of the 388 that host competitions longer than 10 days. So when we look at events that are longer than 10 days, events that have more than 1,000 horses, our risk factors for those events go up. And our challenges at these events is we have commingling of horses of unknown health status. And what I mean by that is, and do not raise your hand to this question, okay? I don't want anybody to say they're guilty of this. How many people have put a horse on the trailer, given it a little butanbanamine because it's a little off, and put it on the trailer? Because that butanbanamine is gonna hide a fever. That butanbanamine is gonna let them look a little bit better than they may be. And then you're going to compete that horse, and that horse could have a potentially infectious disease. And then that horse is being commingled in that population. And unfortunately, we also built our facilities for human convenience. So everything's compacted, sometimes under one roof, several barns and several competition arenas under one roof. So more horses potentially infected or exposed that are in close proximity to each other in that stabling area or in that competition area. How big is our warm-up areas? How many horses are in those warm-up areas at one time? And then we always have the human and animal movements on the facility. So as that animal's moving, as that people are moving, we have the potential for more risk. And unfortunately, we have a situation where we have inadequate or non-existent isolation. Inadequate, don't put your isolation stalls in the middle of the barn, as every horse has to go to the arena. That's not really isolation. That may be a stall that you put a sick horse in, but it's not isolation. And then we have the situation where you have a great plan. You're going to use the veterinary clinic. Well, that veterinary clinic's being shut down because they've got an outbreak, or there's a big outbreak in the area, and you can no longer use that vet clinic. So then we come back to non-existent isolation. So these are all the challenges we have when we think about a disease outbreak at a showgrounds. So how do we prevent the disease in the first place? Our answer is biosecurity. And really, I get asked this a lot, what does biosecurity mean? It really means to stop the entry of pathogens from entering or spreading on a showgrounds or at your home facility. So doing what we can to prevent that disease spread. Doing what we can means doing some things that may be inconvenient. And our goal is to prevent the worst case scenario of a disease outbreak. And we're now going 12 plus years from Ogden, Utah in 2011 at the National Cutting Horse. This is the event that changed a lot of our perspective on equine diseases at events. You had 708 entries, and they were from 21 states and Canadian provinces. They all congregated. It was a longer than 10-day event. They had some biosecurity challenges, meaning a lot of horses loping in one area, sharing communal water, sharing equipment. And we ended up with 90 confirmed cases of equine herpes virus in 10 states. But what we have to think about is now we had sick horses leaving that event, going home and exposing horses on the home property. And that's where you look at this graph down here, or the table, the secondary and tertiary cases. Secondary cases are, you have the horse from Ogden, comes home and gets somebody at the home property sick. That's a secondary case. Then you have, we don't have good control, and we have that secondary case now infecting another horse on the property, and we had tertiary cases. So we ended up with a significant number of horses across the country that were exposed because of one event, because of poor biosecurity and poor response. This has changed a lot of perspectives, and we have now seen a lot more advances in biosecurity because of this. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to let you decide how you think we should control an outbreak or prevent an outbreak. And the scenario we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to give you some background on EHV so you have some information to make these decisions, is we're going to have an equine herpes virus situation at a venue of 200 horses in 10 barns. It's a 4-week event, and we're on week 2 on the Friday. And we got a report of a horse that's unable to rise in barn 4. Each table is going to be assigned a role. So you get to either play the veterinarian today, the competition manager, the trainer, or a communications person. And you're going to figure out how each role will respond. And you have 3 questions to answer on each table. And some of you, half of the tables, will be looking at how do we control the current situation. And the other half of your tables are going to be how do we prevent this from happening. But just to be fair, I wanted to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to EHV. So equine herpes virus is a respiratory virus that can be spread about 30 feet by air. That's without wind and anything like that, so think about that. It's spread by nose-to-nose contact, and it's spread with anything that's been contaminated by nasal secretions. So my favorite, nose rags, or the bridles or halters or any lead ropes or equipment, any feed equipment, any stall cleaning equipment. The virus really likes cold, damp environments. And it can affect all horses because they're exposed at a young age, because herpes is for life, as some people have herpes, cold sores. We have to think about the horse. Herpes is for life because it remains latent in the majority of our horses. It hides out and is reactivated. Now, if I could tell you how that happens and which horses are going to do that, I wouldn't be here. I would be making millions outside of here. So haven't figured that out yet, so you're kind of stuck with me, sorry. The one thing I want you to keep in mind is the regulatory response. And we have 50 states with 50 opinions and 50 different ways of doing things. And the regulatory response to EHV is going to vary. It is either going to be reportable and actionable, meaning the state is going to come in and put a quarantine on that facility, or it's going to be monitored, meaning the state's going to say, okay, you got an outbreak, go ahead and handle it. It goes across the way. Whether it's a respiratory case, because the majority of these cases are respiratory, a percentage of them are going to become neurologic. Again, don't know which ones. So we have to think about what is actionable. In one state, it might be a neurologic horse. In another state, it might be a respiratory case. And in another state, it might be abortion, because that is also one of the parameters of equine herpes. So when we talk about testing for equine herpes, remember what I said about an incubation period. It's 2 to 7 days. So you're not going to see virus or be able to detect it right away. So that's from exposure to when you start seeing clinical signs. So when you think about testing, you have the febrile horse you're going to want to test. You have the neurologic horse that you're going to want to test. But here's the one that throws us all off. There are some horses out in that population that are asymptomatic, not showing you any signs, but are shedding the virus. So you have to think about that in your control or prevention. We don't have an approved, validated test yet. They're in the works for a stall side test, meaning something that you can use that'll give you a quick answer. There is an experimental one right now that can provide that quick result, but it's not validated and it's not licensed yet. We do have confirmatory testing, but when does this happen? It's always a Friday afternoon, and you're going into the show. Not lying, those are the most calls I get, Friday afternoon. So on a Friday afternoon, how are you going to get a result? You're not going to get a result until Monday if you're lucky, because the lab's not going to open until Monday. And it takes about 2 days to get the sample sent in and the test run. Now you have another caveat. The horse may test negative on the first sample. Is it free of disease? Well, I learned the hard way. The answer to that is no. 2015 is when we figured this out. At a big outbreak that I had in California, where I had a sick horse, febrile, would not stop having a fever, and I'm like, it was negative, and we all of a sudden said, let's test it again. We tested again, and sure enough, it was positive. So we've learned that we've seen this repetitively now in outbreaks, where you have a horse that tests negative. Do you let it go back in the population? Now we say, let's test it 24 to 48 hours later. So this is all giving you some information to answer the questions that is going to be proposed to your group. So each table has 10 minutes to answer 3 questions, and you're going to pick a spokesperson. There is a facilitator at your table from USEF that's going to help you and facilitate those questions. We have Group A tables, and that Group A tables is to identify the response measures to that sick horse. So you're going to take action. The Group B tables are going to determine what can you do next time to prevent this type of situation. So again, each table is assigned a role. You're either going to play the veterinarian today, or the competition manager, the trainer, or the event communication representative. So we're going to give you 10 minutes to work through this scenario, and then each table is to give us a spokesperson who's going to present us back up to us what your findings are, and we're going to walk through this scenario. So 10 minutes, starting now. All right, so for those tables, I forgot to make one disclaimer. So you already got one wrong answer if your first question to answer is, call Katie. Because because I did hear that a few times. So today's experiment is so that you all become educated, so I don't have all these phone calls, but I'm happy to be there for you. So we're going to start with Table 1, so we're going to go through the scenario A's first. So that's Table 1, 2, 3, and 4, 9, 10, and 11. You're all A's. So we're going to do the how do you respond to the sick horse that's in the stall? What is your response based on the questions asked? So we'll start with Table 1. If you can tell me what your role was and your question. Yes.
Our role was show veterinarian, receive the initial sick horse call from the trainer.
Yeah, here you go. Go ahead. First question.
Question 1, you received the call of this suspect case. What steps would you take to respond to this call? We all thought the first thing we should do is go to breakfast and not worry about it, but so.
Wrong.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Katie came over and told us we couldn't do that. As the show veterinarian, your first instinct is to just run over there, but you need to assume that this case is positive before you even get there. You need to consider, do you have another change of clothes? Does your tech have another change of clothes? What are you going to do if it turns out to be a truly positive case? You're not going to know that when you first get there. You're going to have to assume that it is positive. Assume that things are going to change once you do get there. So consider taking photographs and/or videos on your way there of the stall, the horse, the barn, the equipment around it, the little whiteboard next to it saying what medications you got last night, things like that. Then when you actually do examine the horse, make certain that you have as much personal protective equipment as you can. Definitely gloves. It'd be nice to have Tyvek, but unless you're from California, you probably don't keep Tyvek in the truck with you. Let's see. We recommend on your way in that for the moment you do your best to isolate the barn. Don't invite 40 other people to come with you to examine the horse. Try to limit it from the moment you hear about it. You can always lift it so that people can go back in if everything is fine, but assume it's positive. Once you do examine the horse, the question is, you are very concerned that this is a case of EHV1. What recommendation would you provide the owner trainer? If the horse is down, recumbent, feverish, any other clinical signs that indicate that, you have multiple things to think about. One of them is that the horse is sick and in very bad state. You want to consider what is best for that horse and what is best for the whole show. What is best for that horse may be, put on your differential, that it may be that that horse needs to go to isolation at a veterinary clinic for its health. But you are not removing it for the health of the other horses. As far as what you say to the owner, you want to get the best history you can from the owner. Where has this horse been? Did it get here yesterday or did it get here 10 days ago? Where was it before that? Was it at home? Was it at another show? What are the other horses that have been around this horse? What are the people that have been around this horse? Who is the groom? Who's the shipper? Did you do it yourself? what has this horse been fed, what kind of medications, all the usual questions. You are going to play 1,000 questions for that owner. Another thing would be insurance, because as the vet, you want to be sure that you can provide the best possible care for that horse. And say again.
Test the stall. You didn't.
Oh, okay. We were also discussing what is the best way for confirmatory, and as of November, they were saying the best way for confirmatory is to immediately test the stall. You can certainly additionally test the horse. I'm sure Katie will go all through this. But we want to be sure that you not only test the horse, but also test the stall. It is proving now to be more accurate. Then if your greatest fears are brought up and the horse is down, looks like it's EHV, the isolation process begins. Notification, you want to notify Katie, you want to notify your state vet who may like to swoop in and take over, which would be wonderful. You may be in a state where they say you're on your own, but you want to notify them. You want to talk with the organizing committee and let them know what the ramifications of this are. You want to discuss all of the options with the organizing committee. And the number one thing is to begin isolation so that that barn is isolated. Make sure nobody goes from that barn to another barn. They say, oh, but we have 3 horses in this barn, 3 in the next, and 3 in the next. Well, you have to have different people in each barn because you're not going back and forth.
We also have a second table that did the same scenario with 9, 10, which one of you was that? Caitlin's here. So while we're walking the mic over there, there's a couple things I will say. I would rather you tell the state or us before you get your test results, because there's going to be some timing issues to try to get a response, because the state's going to want to come in and they need to know more details of how big the show is and what the situation is. So now that some of you are here on the mic, what do you have to add for your group?
Well, I happen to be very lucky to be sitting next to Katie, so. And Dr. Mike, that was all very additional information, actually, than some of the things that we came up with. We also added, so I'm not going to repeat that, but we added to look at all the equipment, no sharing, contact the braider if this happens in the middle of the night, and the braiders moving around the barns. And oftentimes braiders are aware of noticing issues with horses that they can alert because they're there in the middle of the night. We deal with contact the trainer and review contact tracing, and also be aware that there is a process for removing all the manure, all the stuff in the stalls. That doesn't come, that's through the stall removers and the people that do treat it. So that's pretty much what we had come up with. Yeah, good, okay.
Okay, sorry, I guess I had to turn it on. So a couple of things just real quick while we're talking on the veterinary side. The show management and the veterinarian need to work really closely together on this whole situation. And so make sure that if you're a competition manager, that you tell the veterinarians that if they get wind of this, they need to tell you right away. That's one of the key things, so you can work together on controlling this. Because the quickest and the best thing you can do is isolate that one horse as quickly as possible. That is going to be the difference between a successful outbreak and an unsuccessful outbreak. And Glenn can tell you, Glenn with Virginia, you get them out quick, you have a better chance of no other horses on the site getting infected. So again, just remember that is your key step from the veterinarian side, and making sure the veterinarians have supplies to test those horses. And the veterinarians need to know where to send the samples. So if you're taking a vet in, if you're a show manager and you're taking a vet from another state, make sure they communicate with the state that this show's in. Because sometimes they don't know the rules of that state, so they need to be prepared of where the samples should go, how quickly you can get the samples there. So very good. We'll go on to the second table here. Oh, here it comes. And if you guys can just say what your role is and what your questions are.
All right, we are the competition management or manager, Group A. I don't know.
Group A, yep.
Right. Our first question was, the vet calls us and says that it's very likely to be EHV. What steps are we taking to respond, and who do we contact? So initially, we said that we would contact you and the state vet to get next steps. Then we would contact the owner/trainer to inform them if they weren't aware that there is a sick horse in their area. Oh, yep. And then we would, at some point later on, once we got a little bit more organized, have a mandatory all-competition meeting to ensure that misinformation is not getting out there. Our next question was, what steps would you take to ensure the show continues? Which was a little bit intermingled with our response of what steps would you take to respond. So after contacting the people that we needed to contact, we would immediately move that horse to isolation. It wasn't clear what the isolation plan was. So we suggested maybe these barns look relatively large, putting them all the way at the end and making sure that there were at least 3 stalls, if not more, of empty stalls between them and any other horses. We would then start monitoring all the horses in barns 3, 4, and 5 that maybe, depending on the proximity, may have come in contact with that horse. Install foot baths and hand washing stations. Ensure that there was no transfer of equipment between the barns. Implement a twice daily temperature check on all horses competing or there. Test horses for EHV1. For all the horses who might have come in contact with that horse. Limit the time slots of warm-up rings to limit traffic. Protection gear to ensure no spread of infection. Waive all braiding.
Wait, what did you just say?
Waive braiding so that we don't have...
Oh, you're going to tell them not to braid?
Sure.
Oh, okay. That's going to go successful. Let me tell you that one. Just so you know. Okay?
We were going to...
no braiders.
Limit entry onto competition grounds to just those who needed to be there, no kind of family coming and visiting. Then we were going to, also a fun one, limit the horses leaving to whatever the state told us we could and give us the all clear, and then implement disinfection stations at the entry and exits of the showgrounds. And then the last question is, at what point would you implement your isolation plan? And that was immediate because we isolated that horse right away.
Good. Second, do you guys, yep. Limiting people at a horse show, a little bit of challenge. Telling them what they can't do, a little bit of a challenge. So we'll talk about that. Hold on the testing, because that's an interesting perspective. You're testing them all in the exposed barn. We'll talk about that.
So we had much of the same response. The initial contact, we did note if the vet who notified maybe wasn't the competition vet, to make sure that we were in contact with the competition vet first and then state vet and you. Trainers meeting, and specifically identifying to make sure that people actually attended, and if they did not attend, that we got in contact with them otherwise. Impressing upon them the importance of reporting, and if they saw something, to say something. We did have some concern about the mention of some potential other febrile horses, so identifying who those horses are, if there were potentially more horses within the same barn, and it was the entire barn exposed potentially, instead of moving the horses to an isolation stall, to more lock down the barn itself. It was unclear how close the other barns were next to it, so if they were within the zone, identifying whether they also needed to be isolated. But in lockdown, not just saying don't leave, but actually implementing some monitored security on it to ensure that there's no in and out of the famous loose dog, and that there is available equipment to disinfect on entry and exit of that area. As far as keeping the grounds running, in addition to what that table said, we felt it was important to make sure that there were available times for horses to get out of the stalls in barn clusters so that they stayed with the horses that they had been around, and also identifying what were the most important parts of the show to keep running, and that there were potentially some portions that were maybe a little higher risk that would need to be canceled to keep the rest of the show running. I think everything else is probably about the same.
So a couple points that you both mentioned is taking temperatures, requiring that,
Oh, yeah.
and requiring reporting of a fever so that we can take action on those, especially in the exposed barn. So those are two critical control points right there, so you can get anybody out quickly. The one thing I want to address is the testing, because this is the devil in the detail situation. So remember what I said about horses have latent EHV. So horses periodically shed a low level. Some of these horses shed a low level of virus. So if you go in and test an entire barn of exposed horses, you don't know if that virus is due to a reactivation or an exposure. So you have to be very careful, because if you go out today and go in and test the whole showgrounds, which I do not recommend, okay? I do not recommend. But if you went out, you're bound to find positive horses. So we have to keep in mind that this virus is in the horses, it's in the environment, they're continually exposed. So you have to be strategic in an outbreak situation of what you're testing. If you test, you must do something with those results. And what I mean by that is if you get a positive, you can't just leave it in that stall, because that's going to be the worst thing you can do. Not just from a PR standpoint, but from a disease standpoint, because you don't know. So if you're testing, be sure you have enough isolation stalls. That becomes a problem. So just keep that in mind, and we'll talk about a little bit later about locating isolation if you don't have an area. But just be careful on that whole testing thing, because I get a lot of show managers that are like, I'm gonna require a test. I'm like, no, that is not a good idea. Please do not. I do not recommend testing non-clinical horses. Yes, there is potential for asymptomatic shedders at a low level, but we gotta remember, we're gonna show in an environment that does have virus or bacteria out there. So I'll get off my little horse on that. So we're now here. Who's speaking? Oh, you are. Here you go.
Okay. So our role in all of this is as trainer, and I'm reading here. So let me start off in the very beginning. So we find out we have an infected horse, or a horse that has a high fever that's not well. And we've contacted the veterinarian, and also we've discovered what the isolation protocol is for the show through the show manager. It says here, the trainer mentions that there have been several horses that have had fevers for the last week, which, and they feel that there's something just going through the barn. That's highly concerning to me, and I'm reading that did not necessarily come up in our discussion here. As trainer, I would certainly monitor anti-inflammatory use, possibly altering temperatures that are being taken on horses. We would take temperatures probably twice a day to make sure that the horses were not truly, any of them were carrying any more fever. And just with that idea of several horses having fevers, you know, it comes to a point where responsibility to the horses and to the show is foremost important, and we may have to withdraw. But going forward from that, the horse that's sick is isolated. Obviously, with state law, if you're ever considering, you know, moving your horses back home, you have to decide, is that a good idea? Should the horses just remain there until they're healthy before you take them back home and expose them to the rest of your horses at home? So outside of that, you have clients at a show, and if they find out, potentially their horse is sick, especially when you're telling them that they cannot even visit their horse or touch their horse. And the sad thing about owners is if they think their horse is sick, they want to touch them even more and spread it. And they just need to know that that can't happen. So the use of very limited exposure to horses in their stalls, the use of disinfectants, no water buckets being transferred. You take a bunch of water buckets out and wash them. Every horse must have their own bucket back. Things like that. All equipment has to be disinfected and nothing shared. It's basically, you're just going to have to do a lockdown, and it's going to be a challenge. But when you find or hear that horses have had a fever through the week, several of your horses, I think there's a point where you have to say, this is not my show, we're done. Okay.
Yep. Your group next. Who's speaking? All right. Yeah.
We thought of a lot of the same things, but I think that our table assumed that we were not the trainer that had the sick horse. So we had a little bit less information when we got started. We were assuming that we heard that there was a horse that was down and being examined by a veterinarian, so what would be our initial response? So our initial response was we wanted our horses to be isolated because we thought maybe the down horse couldn't be moved, so maybe our horses could be moved to a quarantine area either on or off site. We also would stop working our horses and find out as much as we could about the illness, consult with the veterinarian and follow their instructions. But then the second question was, what was our immediate measures that we could implement? So we said a lot of the same things about keep exposure to people that are only designated staff, disinfect equipment, don't share supplies or equipment between horses, monitor temps twice a day. If we could, we still wanted to move to a quarantine barn on or off site, evaluate health history of each horse and who has touched each horse and what other horses those people had been in contact with. We also thought about modifying the stalls so that horses couldn't touch noses. So if they could, if there was a way that we could do that. We didn't jump to the conclusion that this was EHV. We didn't know what it could be, so we wanted to kind of go crazy with bug spray. We wanted to make sure that hoses didn't touch water buckets when filling up, or manure buckets didn't touch the manure pile when we changed the stalls bedding, but that's pretty much it, other than what you guys said.
Yeah, the people are the key here, guys. Knowing what people have been in those barns and what people have touched those horses is key.
You guys, can I say one more thing? I'm a retired communicable disease epidemiologist, and I just would say...
Ooh, you planted somebody here, guys. Thanks. Ooh.
As a person who's worked big outbreaks before for people, I just want to say, I was working an outbreak once where I was trying to do things, and so many people were calling me at once that I couldn't do my job. So my boss was calling me, his boss was calling me, that lieutenant governor was calling me, the county health department was calling me. And I'm one person, so I have one person standing here, one person on the phone, several emails, all this at once. So I just want to say that it's really helpful if the show manager can designate a spokesperson and set up a daily call. So if you do like a daily Zoom call that updates everybody, then you can have everybody call and do their updates all at once every day. And it can be a press release, or it can be, just our working group, but that will keep some of the heat off of you so you can actually do your job.
I agree. I've been in that seat several thousand times. So yes, I would agree with that.
The nice thing is that we've just now found, instead of just calling Katie, we can call Cindy. Do you want to give your phone number out to the group?
This is a perfect segue because this is our communication table, right? Yep. Which one of you? All right.
I got elected because I've been through this. We had an EHV outbreak last summer, and the first thing that I learned is that the state veterinarian is in charge. And listening to some of the other states, I guess that some states, the state vet doesn't get involved the way ours did. And just as luck would have it, I had just done a biosecurity plan, and the 2 state veterinarians that were on site with us were the 2 that helped me write the plan. So I already had the cell numbers for those vets, and so it was easy once we got the call back from the lab that the horses were positive. In our case, the stable that was affected, both horses were in the same stable, and they had their own traveling veterinarian that were on the road with them, and the horses were shipped out to Rood and Riddle immediately to go in quarantine, so they were gotten off the grounds. That was a huge PR thing. But once the state veterinarian got on site, the first communications was management. It was the show vet, the affected stable vet, and the horse center. And we got our game plan together, and then we had a meeting with the stable. The state vet had initially quarantined the entire grounds. Once she was on the ground, she released all the barns except the affected barn, just sort of like our situation here. We next had a meeting with all the affected trainers in that one barn. And they were actually allowed, if their state of where their home was allowed them to go home, they were released to go. But they were toast as far as showing. The next meeting we had from a communication standpoint was all the other barns, trainers and a few exhibitors that chose to come. And surprisingly, the trainers, they voted to continue the horse show, which the state veterinarian allowed. And one of the things was that every horse on the grounds had to have its temperature taken twice a day. That was one of the conditions for continuing the show. From a communication standpoint, the most difficult thing was so many people calling and wanting information before we had the information. But once we knew what we were dealing with, we had 3 different releases posted on social media and e-blasted to exhibitors saying what the situation was. We did a second one in the middle of the horse show giving an update. And then we did, thanks to the state veterinarian's office, they sent 2 teams of disinfectant livestock inspectors that disinfected every single stall on the barn, on the grounds. And we sent a release out notifying that. We had a show that the immediate show was an Arabian show coming in. But this was a saddle horse show that was affected. But after all the communications that we did on the disinfection, there was one stable that elected initially not to come to the Arabian show out of concern, and then in the end they came. But after all was said and done in our case, thank goodness, unfortunately, both affected horses died, but no other horses were affected on the grounds. So, and the horses first showed symptoms 2 days after being on the grounds, so which meant they came on the grounds with the already affected. They didn't get it at the horse show.
Yeah, and it always happens at night too, so just remember, one thing that Glenn left off that I think is important is he also had the ability to secure the facility that night, so no one snuck out. So that everybody stayed put until the situation was assessed. So that communication to the local law enforcement was critical in my belief, because they kept everybody and they were able to contain it and calm people down through the communication. And ironically, I actually was at Glenn's facility and looked at his biosecurity plan 1 month prior. So I did not plan for him to have an outbreak. Contrary to what his first call was, did I plant something there? No, I did not, okay? It's not job security, I've got enough of that, so no. So keys on the communication is trainers meetings, all participant meetings, and as much communication as possible as early as you know. And that is the critical point, is everybody that comes to that event wants answers immediately when you're looking at a sick horse or a down horse. Make sure the messaging in advance is, when we have solid information, we will present it to you. Please give us time to investigate, because Glenn's right. He had 1 million calls. I started getting calls. But we need to have, the state has to do their investigation, or the facility, or whoever's in charge. So that's a key point that people seem to miss is, as she said before, everybody's calling and wanting information right away. You need the time to do the investigation. You need the time to find out who's been affected, who's the contacts, who's all touched those horses. So that's really critical. All right, so this was you have the sick horse and we're gonna respond. So the key messages that I took from this are, sick horse has to be isolated immediately and preferably to a veterinary clinic, because it's a neurologic horse, to get veterinary care. 2 is all of the other horses that have been exposed have to be looked at and have a temperature twice a day. And that if there's a temperature, 3, that temperature is reported. So we have isolation, taking temps, and reporting. Ironically, those are rule changes that are proposed, but we won't talk about those right now. So that's one of your conclusions, and I would agree with those conclusions. Now we're going to go to the other side, and we're going to talk about what happens to prevent this type of situation. And so, Stephen, it's your time to write. So were you guys B1? Or what are you? B-vet? You are B-vet. Okay, who's speaking? All right.
Yeah, we were, part of me wishes I was a competition manager, because that's kind of what I do. I have the good opportunity to organize events all across America, so I've experienced a lot of different scenarios, different forms of implication, biosecurity plans, a lot of them very differing. The way we interpreted this role, which was a little bit difficult for me coming from the management side, similar to Glenn over here, obviously our questions were, what information can a veterinarian provide to a competition management in advance of the event? And we combined that with number 2, which was, how can a veterinarian best help competitors and competition managers prevent disease outbreaks? We interpreted this message as pre-event planning, communicating with management when the treating vet is on site prior to the start of the competition, making sure the competition management has the proper state regulations in place in their biosecurity plan, making sure their biosecurity plan is sound and intact, making sure they have proper isolation stalls, especially dependent on the size of the show, the size of the venue, anticipating all those scenarios, basically just pre-prevention. Usually, in my experience, the veterinarian doesn't necessarily do this way in advance of the event, of arriving at the show. Obviously, we run many events, so we have our biosecurity plan in place way in advance, and it's a little bit plug and play for us. A little bit similar to Glenn, we've experienced this on site where I'm trying to be from the veterinarian side instead of the competition management side, but making sure obviously everybody communicates immediately, making sure that the management has the biosecurity plan posted everywhere in the show office, visible for all of the competitors and exhibitors to see, as well as posted on social media prior to the event, but I don't know that the veterinarian necessarily would communicate that with management before the event, but those are the steps that we would take to make sure all of our competitors and exhibitors are in place and ready to act accordingly with all the different variables that have been explained already. And then number 3 was, what information can a veterinarian provide to the competitors to better protect equine health during the event? Now, during the event, we interpreted this as, if there has been something that has been identified as a concern on the property, making sure that the proper outlets have been explained to everybody about what they can do to prevent it, like take temperatures twice a day, limit your contact with other barns and other horses, making sure your staff and your grooms, your owners and everybody are also limiting their contact with everybody, and just make sure that all those details and biosecurity plan is enacted and in place.
So while David's going to the other group on the other side, sorry it's spread out so far, so raise your hand whoever the speaker is for the other veterinary table. Okay. So just a quick question or comment on this. The one thing that the group was talking about, the veterinarian should be communicating prior to the event. And that's where there's a lot of times that doesn't happen, especially when you're bringing in a veterinarian from out of state and they don't know the state rules and they've never been introduced. I was a state veterinarian and I don't like calls out of the blue from a vet that says, hey, I'm here at an event. Where can I send these samples? Well, what event and what samples are you wanting to submit? So this is really one of the points that I want to encourage competition managers to have that conversation in advance, to also know what diseases are in that area at the time. And the veterinarian or the competition manager has the ability to go on to the Equine Disease Communication Center to know what's in their area by alerts. So I hope I didn't steal what's over there.
You
but
did, Katie. That was awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Sorry.
So don't intermediately go between Katie. I think that was one of our key things that we were saying. But so I come from clinical medicine, and I will say this, that prevention is very different than treatment. And if you want to do prevention, then you have to think differently about preventing and not treating. And it's the same problem we have in human medicine, is when we think about things in the current context and we want different things to happen, they don't happen. So if we really want to get to prevention, then we need to think about rules differently. So this awareness of the show management and veterinarian connection, usually, like you said, right, this happens, you know, it doesn't happen long in advance. There's not pre-planning meetings. And so we have to decide if that's something that we want to take on as competition management and for horse welfare. Do we want prevention to start becoming part of the steps? So should there be pre-meetings where you have this awareness of what diseases are, what the environmental factors are? Some of this is these diseases exist. If you have healthier horses, they don't show up in the horses. So, what is the environment in the competition? Can there things that can go on during that competition that can make the horses healthier that week? Can we have different protocols on nutrition and hydration and things that we can help bring awareness to before the competition is going on, with both environmental factors, keeping stress down for the horses, following protocols, so some of these things don't show up in the horses even if they're in the environment. Having those types of meetings, the biosurveillance plans, making sure they're in place, and then the awareness to what's in the environment so that you can help prevent it better. And then during the competition, we were just reiterating what a lot of other people said around following procedures, awareness to procedures, protocols, and those types of things.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
So the awareness in advance, and that is something that is a transition to what we have been doing, because we've been very reactive in our industry, and I'm very excited to have a position where I can only talk health and biosecurity all day, and sometimes people have to listen to me. So it's even better when we can be proactive and I don't have to go out there and be reactive. So I think that's really a good point, is let's transition to this proactive step. Yes, sir.
One thing that, from a communication standpoint and veterinary standpoint, we were lucky to have a wonderful show veterinarian that knew all the exhibitors, and she made a point of going all over the grounds, talking to trainers and exhibitors, answering their questions, and just reassured them that everything was contained, and that was a huge benefit.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to insult veterinarians here, but some of them are very good at communicating with these folks and lessening the fear. And I've talked to some where I've had to talk them off a ledge, and what they tell me scares me, and how they've sent it to me, so I can only imagine what they're telling the clients or the showgrounds. So I really think that's another avenue we need to look at, is how do we communicate with our veterinarians, and how do we make sure we have the tools for those veterinarians to be able to do their job and communicate effectively to calm the fears, so not everybody is panic mode about their horse is going to die, because that is sometimes where you can get that, how much fear do you put into them? Well, you've put too much, now they're all panicking, and we're not able to continue the show successfully. So that's a very good point. So you guys are next. What are you? Oh, it's you? Okay, competition management.
We are curious, Dr. Katie, what is the biosecurity protocol for passing this mic around to a whole group of people? All right, so our first question is, how would you evaluate the risk of disease for your competition venue prior to our event? So we said to, check with your state offices, online, any other informational resources that are available for just what is going on in the area at that time. And then looking at your venue setup itself, are shavings or hay available for purchase, or are they required for purchase by the facility, or are you allowed to bring in your own sources? Are people bringing in their own buckets? If they are being provided by the facility, then they all need to be sterilized. Our second question was, what steps could you take to ensure healthy horses enter the competition grounds? This one we had, in your prize list, if you know this ahead of time, well ahead of time, then you can put some best practices in your prize list for your public and your participants to know ahead of time what to look for, especially if it's specific disease, if there's certain things to watch out for prior to coming to the grounds. Definitely have a biosecurity and isolation plan in place. Train your licensed officials and your staff on what to look for while they're working on those grounds, and making sure they're up to date on all the information coming in about whatever it is that's going on. Know your state requirements. Educate your staff and educate the participants on the disease as well. So when they come in, such as a trainer's meeting, making sure that everybody's aware of what's going on and how to handle it, what steps to be taking. And then you have your COGINs and your health certificates, having a health checkpoint before entering the grounds for just that first initial touch point. And then our third question was what biosecurity measures could be required by competition managers to best protect the health of horses on the competition grounds. We had to have stall plaques, or stall cards, I should say, on the each stall with contact information and general health information. If you're going to be doing temperatures, you could list them there. Limit barn access. We all know that the public love to come in and touch every horse that has its head outside of their door. But limiting that barn access so that only necessary people need to be in there would be extremely helpful. No communal waters, anything like that on the grounds. Stables have the high and solid walls so that horses cannot touch one another, and then sanitize as much as possible. Encourage reporting from any of your barn staff. Barn staff cleaning their hands between even working with their own horses and their own groups, making sure they're still cleaning their hands between each interaction. And then I know I was going really fast, sorry. But I think I covered everything. Yeah. Okay.
I don't have disinfectant with me, but don't touch your face, okay? The next table over on the other side, and I'm not going to make any comments to cut you off and say something you might say. So I'm going to stay quietly until you get the mic.
Did you wash that?
It's very hard for me.
So we're also the competition manager looking at the prior things to evaluate. So we had most of the same things that the other one did. I think some of the things that we mentioned, obviously the sanitizing of the facility, taking a look at the flow of horses as not only how do they come onto the competition ground, but also the flow while they're on the competition grounds from the stabling to the exercise areas to the show arenas, taking a look at that just in case that needs to be monitored. Also looking at the health certificate time frame being shortened to a much shorter time frame, like a 5-day, I think is what we said for if we're in an outbreak, which makes good sense, and making sure that everything is monitored as it comes on to the facility so that horses are checked and paperwork is checked at the gate. They're not just allowed to come in and then check the paperwork at a later time. Obviously taking the temperatures and keeping the logs is important, and then also one of the big things for us was also the no community water. And then just making sure that all of the local and state notices are kept up with, and that all the information is available to everybody. I think that was pretty much everything that was covered before too.
Okay, so a couple points on this. So basically what you're saying is ensuring healthy horses are coming in. And so we're looking at healthy horses coming in, doing a health declaration I heard earlier, or doing a health certificate. Whatever rules the show puts in on biosecurity, we're 100% behind them from the USCF Federation standpoint. If you're going to put some requirements in, we strongly encourage you to actually verify and validate some of these, because again, if you have a policy and you're just saying you're going to take a health certificate and you don't actually validate it, you're only using it as a receptacle of receiving the information but not actually validating. Sometimes we have some challenges when that happens. And if you are doing the validation step and you do come upon a forgery or something that doesn't look right, contact us. Let me know, because we will investigate that, and we have identified this year some falsified health certificates, and we did take action against those individuals. So again, we really want to be there to support you in whatever biosecurity requirements and rules you put forward. And if you do have an issue, that is really what we're here to help you address those issues. And make sure that any biosecurity rules you are putting in place, we're there to support you. That's what my position is. And if you are needing help on those biosecurity rules, that's what I'm here for. And as we talked about at both tables, so we're limiting horse-to-horse contact. We're limiting the people that are touching those horses to the essential people only, if we can. We're avoiding that communal water. And we're also monitoring those horses' temperatures. And again, avoiding that sharing of equipment. So ironically, those are the 5 tips that we have a biosecurity poster. So we're more than happy to share that poster with the competitions to put on their showgrounds as a reminder. It goes back to the messaging. And I know I'm stepping on the messaging people, so I'll stop now. Next group.
So we were the trainer group trying to prevent the disease outbreak. So our very first question was, what steps would you take before the competition to protect the health of the horses? So as you all have mentioned, number one, making sure that there is individual equipment for each horse, including a thermometer, individual for each horse. Ideally with that. Sanitizing that equipment before you go. We already heard some of the competition management talking about sanitizing the stalls before competitors move in, but either verifying or sanitizing the stalls yourselves. Making sure to take temperatures regularly at home, ideally every day, but at minimum once a day the week before the show, to know what the horse's standard temps are, and then be able to track if you have a spike in that before you leave, and making sure to look at them before you load them up and haul them out, to make sure to take that into consideration. We also talked about designating specific people for specific horses to try to prevent cross-contamination. We were really working under ideal pie-in-the-sky scenarios where money is no object. So we know that sometimes some of these are challenging with that. So our next question was, what could you do during the competition to help protect the horses? Once again, doing temperature logs twice a day while you're at the competition, having somebody designated who is in charge of making sure they're done, and making sure to notify people if there is a high temperature with someone. So having a designated point person for that. Once again, as they mentioned before, minimizing the contact with horses between stalls. If it is a stall that they can touch noses, those kind of things, trying to put boards up or prevent horses from being able to touch each other during that. Also then, once again, no community shared drinking sources, not putting hose ends in buckets when you're filling them, those kinds of things. People sanitizing their own hands, clothes, and feet between horses, which is a difficulty, especially for farriers or vets coming in doing basic work, braiders, those kinds of things. And then once again, having a protocol for the communication process if there is an issue. And so having your clients know and expect, and having a designated person to communicate with them if there is an issue within your group, if there's an issue within the show, and how that is happening. And then our final question was, what steps could you take after the competition to ensure that you didn't bring anything home? Once again, sanitizing the equipment. Most importantly, quarantining those incoming horses, so putting them someplace separate from the home horses, and maintaining a separate person caring for those horses for the quarantine or isolation period of time. Because if they take care of those horses and then go elsewhere, that defeats the purpose. Continuing to do temp logs for those horses. I think that was about it.
Okay, the next group's over here, and the mic is coming to you. I'm hoping I don't step on toes, but I'm probably going to. The one key point that you made, and I would really emphasize, designating a person. That holding somebody accountable to the biosecurity protocols, and somebody that's actually checking for that trainer, because that trainer can't see everything. So again, having that designated person responsible, that has helped in a number of outbreaks that I've dealt with, is having a responsible party that's only there to look at the biosecurity protocols and do follow those protocols. And I really hope I didn't step on toes. Okay, go ahead.
You didn't step on any toes. We also are playing the trainer role in prevention, and our two guiding principles were education and establishing habits. And we said that good habits at home then lead to making it much easier to have good protocols at the horse show. Some of our basics for at home in terms of education: subscribing to the EDCC website with the daily updates so that you're informed, using your resources of your own veterinarian and your state veterinarian for just staying informed of diseases and symptoms and treatments. And then at home, doing a daily temp check of all horses under your care, custody, or control, not just your showing horses, but if any of the retirees, school horses that don't leave the property, so that you know a baseline on all of your horses. Educate your staff. Have best practices at home that your staff follow, from disinfecting equipment, reducing, minimizing the amount of shared equipment as much as feasible, disinfecting between uses if something has to be shared, and also making your clients aware so that they don't take offense or they don't participate in disease spread by following some basic best practices so that they're invested in keeping their horses healthy. Having some PPE type supplies, both for personnel as well as in general tools. Then knowing if you're shipping your horses to shows, either your own trailer or professional shippers, educating yourself on what their protocols are for disinfecting and for safe practices. Also, before going to the horse show, knowing what the facility and the organizer protocols are. What kind of stalls are there? Do they have the wire mesh in the upper half, or are the stalls relatively enclosed? Are they under a big tent or indoors, or are they relatively outdoors? So that you know what you're going to, so you can take proper effective steps as much as possible within your own unit. And then any communication plan that the organizer has. Do they communicate with the trainers by text, or what the communication lines are? Then when you get to the show, you've already established some good practices. You, right before the show, 3 days, double temp the horses. And then throughout the show, double temp your horses, reinforce your best practices. If you are bringing in help at the horse show, like braiders, or you're hiring a mucker at the horse show, then educating them on what your expectations are for when they're in your barn area. Reminding your clients that when they go see their buddies from other barns, reduce the horse-to-horse contact. Avoid congested areas, a lot of just good basic best practices. If you notice a sick horse that's not in your barn area, but it's showing some symptoms, then notify somebody official, the organizer, the steward, or the veterinarian, just in case that horse isn't getting reported. And the other thing you can look at is in your stall setup, perhaps you can put your feed stall between yourself and the other trainer, and just try to create a little bit of buffer zone as much as realistically possible. And then when you go home, keep doing the same thing. Temp your horses. If you're concerned about anything, make sure, if it's a facility either that you control or that you're part of, are there isolation stalls at your home facility? And is there a need to use an isolation stall upon return? And make these sorts of things your habits, so you are really aware of your horses and you can help reduce spread.
So key message is start at home and continue through the show and continue when you get back home. So the last table, right here. There you go, Leslie.
Well, I have to say that Aaron's team of trainers and Marnie's team of trainers has made our job as the communication representative super easy. Basically, I think we can just say, good job, well done, keep it up, and come on to our show. But no, in all seriousness, we're our group is going to dovetail on the competition management, Nicole's table and Britt's table of managers. And I think the top, to start off, the top 5 key biosecurity messages that we're going to request that our competitors follow while on the grounds, and it's already been covered by the training groups and the organizer groups, is that first and foremost, we're going to, while on grounds, we're going to recommend daily temperature monitoring, ideally twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and not in proximity to any exercise time, which can influence a horse's temperature slightly if they've just, just come off a training session or competition session. And also, we could, depending on the situation, apparently, especially if, say, there was an outbreak in the weeks prior to our competition, we could require that temperature logs be placed on each horse's stall and require those twice-a-day temps to be logged on that. And communicate, that's extremely important, that if exhibitors end up, having a horse that has a temperature, say 101.5 or higher, or actually in symptoms of any kind, they should immediately report that to show management and the competition official, stewards or TD, who in turn can likely contact the veterinarian, and that way, whatever issue or situation can be addressed in a very timely situation. Let's see, communicate regularly that they should continue to practice those biosecurity protocols that hopefully they started at home, and continue that throughout the competition. And we would also continue to communicate that there are regular sanitizing stations or resources on the grounds, and just keep reminding people to use them. And it's basically just to keep reminding them to be mindful and to share the responsibility. Let's see, then and also to recommend that they keep their pets confined and secured at all times while on grounds. That's important. And another point was made, and this is a tough one because it sort of impacts some of the things we would really like to do with our horses when we're on competition grounds, but especially if they say there was an outbreak in somewhere in the vicinity, and especially within short term prior to this competition, it's probably a good idea not to be hand grazing your horses, especially in common grazing areas, because we've already, as Dr. Flynn let us know, it's transferred very easily by those nasal secretions. So it's about being really mindful, just reminding our exhibitors at every point during the day to think about what they're doing and be mindful about their actions. So then the second question was what messages can be provided prior to the event to promote the equine health and biosecurity. So obviously, first of all, we can make exhibitors aware of our competition's biosecurity plan and the protocols that are in place, and what the procedure is in the event of an outbreak. And that would include providing contact information, can start with the prize list, and then can continue with other emails. We'll get into that in the third question, which is via the modalities of communication that we're talking about. But basically, it's to make exhibitors aware of what our biosecurity plan is and what those protocols are that they will be expected to follow while on grounds. And again, we would communicate that we highly recommend the temperature monitoring at home at least 7 days prior to make sure we're covering that incubation period for the virus. And first and foremost, do not load a febrile horse onto the trailer the day of the event. That horse is just going to have to stay at home. It's just too much of a risk. And again, that kind of dovetails with the recommending that they practice the proper biosecurity measures at home well in advance of the competition. And then finally, a big one is that our competition would communicate that our competition will require certain documentation prior to being allowed on the grounds. And of course, that would include the vet certificate. Hopefully, with it, and those obviously, as we all know, those requirements vary state by state. 5 to 14 days prior to the event, probably leaning closer toward 5 days prior, if possible. Also, making declaration of the horses, IDing the horses that will be on that van or trailer that will be arriving, and the estimated, time and date of arrival, just so we know when to expect those horses on the grounds, and then to provide or make sure that they have proof of vaccination. It could be either submitted prior to arriving, or we could just say to have it, make sure that the trainers have it in possession at all times while on the grounds, and perhaps communicate that management might be doing spot checks just to verify that that documentation is in possession. And then also another one we thought was important prior to the competition, it's important to provide the contact information well ahead of time so the exhibitors know who to contact and how to contact them in the event that their horse becomes ill while on grounds. And so then the third question was what kind of communication vehicles? How do we communicate all this out? So obviously, number one, you publish necessary information, protocols, procedures in the prize list. Also, the contact information for who to contact and how if a situation arises. Then a direct email to exhibitors can go out with their entry confirmations, again reiterating the important protocols, the arrival information and required documentation. And then throughout the show, we'll use our competition's social media channels, WhatsApp or other group texting platforms, just to share reminders, important updates as they become available, that kind of thing. And then finally, make sure there's signage posted throughout the competition grounds. You could even use QR codes or some other thing that folks could scan with their smartphones that would take them directly to contact information, telephone numbers, emails, that kind of thing, and also remind them again about the specific protocols. And it would be a good idea or good recommendation to make sure that that signage and those contact info and protocols on the grounds are in English and Spanish. Did I leave anything out? Okay.
Good job. One thing I will say, I have looked at a lot of social media for shows and events, and I've looked at a lot of biosecurity plans and messaging. So here's one situation that came up where the show was very good about talking about biosecurity. But then they post a photo all about hydrating your horse during an event. And they have a horse drinking out of a communal water trough. I don't think that's the same message we want to be sending. So it's also the photos that are linked to that message and the practices of show management, show staff, during the event to continue that message of good biosecurity, good practices. It comes down to making sure that you can communicate and also watch what you're doing so that you are following your protocols and procedures. There's been a couple questions that came up that I want to address regarding temperature and why is it 101.5? That's pretty much the national standard because we want an early trigger point. Now, it's understand that not all horses with a fever are infectious. We have horses that colic, cellulitis, abscesses. Those are not infectious horses, but at least they need to be looked at by a veterinarian, and that's really why we say report that fever to a veterinarian so they can evaluate that. So that's really where we're at on that. Now, the thing to keep in mind, again, as it's been mentioned before, it needs to be taken first thing in the morning before any medications are given. If Firocoxib or Equiox is given, if those products are given to the horse, there might be an extended protection and temperature control. So you might want to say, hey, what's my normal horse's temperature? If it's starting to go up, we might want to check that horse. The other thing I will say is that when we're talking about stalls, because this came up several times through this conversation, we understand that venues cannot change their stalls. Some of them are already got bars on those stalls, but there's ways we can control how much exposure happens. You can put boards up, you can put canvas up, there's different things you can do. But one thing you need to understand, again, is we have to make sure we have proper ventilation in these barns. And we also have to think about how we're going to control an outbreak. Well, just understand that whole barn is going to be exposed. And that's how you have to move forward, because we're not going to change the structure of some of these barns. So those are just a couple things that came up that I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page. The other thing is, and I've gone to a lot of shows where there's manure stained stalls and people try to tell me that's a clean stall. Okay, there is a thing called cleaning and disinfecting. So you have to clean first to get that manure stain. And you can get that manure stain off. You actually have to use a surfactant or something like a detergent to pull that off. And the best thing you can use is, with the little amount of water, is Dawn Power Wash. And that actually, the foamer will actually get on there and actually start to work. You might actually have to use some elbow grease to get that off, but it does get off. And the key to reason why I'm saying that is in an outbreak situation, those areas have to be cleaned to make sure there's no virus or bacteria in there. So unfortunately, people think cleaning is just cleaning things off and then just applying some disinfectant. But really, cleaning is making sure there is nothing on that surface and it has ability for that disinfectant to penetrate. So with that, I want to make sure we cover some key points before I let you go. It's really coming down to the healthy horse plus a healthy competition grounds. That's the only way we're going to have success. So it goes back to all the protocols we talked about today. It's a joint effort, and what the competitors and exhibitors need to practice are those 5 tips we talked about, is limiting that horse-to-horse contact, limiting the people's contacting of those horses, and if people are contacting, make sure there's some hand sanitizer or some disinfection available. Avoid that sharing of equipment, those nose rags, the bridles, those things that are just all thrown together and exposing multiple bridles. And obviously communal water. And the reason why water is so important here is herpes virus alone can live in those water troughs for 21 days. If you don't clean and disinfect those troughs, that virus is going to perpetuate in there. So really cleaning the troughs out and not using communal water and not dipping the hose into multiple buckets and monitoring your horse's temperature, as we've talked about. And we've talked about, from the competition side, what is a healthy competition grounds? Well, we talked about cleaning and disinfecting the stalls. We talked about those common areas. How many horses can lope in one area? Do you have enough exercise areas so you're not putting them all in one area and they're congregating close together? Allow only healthy horses to enter. We talked about the health certificate, declarations, call guns, that sort of thing. Health monitoring, we repetitively, I'm very proud of all of you, because I think somebody paid you all to make sure I heard temperature monitoring 100 times. But temperature monitoring is critical, because that is our control step, is identifying those sick horses so that they can move to isolation. And I'm going to take a minute to talk about what is appropriate isolation. And again, that appropriate isolation is away from all other horses, as far away as possible. And I have many facilities who call me, I have no room to isolate, I need to fill every stall. Okay, well, go ahead and fill every stall, but you better have a plan of where you're going to put up pipe corrals or temporary stalls. And if that means taking over a parking lot, or if that means taking over a ring, you're sure as heck going to do that. Because either the state's going to tell you to do that, or I'm going to come in there and say, find a place to put stalls. And I've done this in several of the outbreaks I've dealt with, is there's no stalls. They're all full. And we've had to take over an arena. In the summer, when there's no temporary stalls left, and you have nowhere to get any temporary stalls rented, you have to go with pipe corrals. So know where you're going to get your pipe corrals and where you're going to throw those up. So again, it's really planning in advance, because I'm not a miracle worker. I can't come up with an isolation stall immediately when you call me and say you have a disaster on your hands. So it really comes down to planning in advance and being prepared, because it's not a matter of if this is going to happen, guys. It's when it's going to happen. So please, that's really why I'm having this conversation, so we can get the message out of healthy horses, healthy competition relies on everyone doing their part at home, before the show, at the show, and when they go home. So I would like to thank Merck and BioPlanet for sponsoring today. The BioPlanet electrostatic disinfection spray system is actually over on the wall over here. There is a cart that you can pull and spray, and there is a backpack sprayer. I have tested the backpack sprayer, folks. It does work very well. And what this electrostatic sprayer does is once you've cleaned the barn, guys, clean it, remember, what it does is it's able to, as the electrostatic sprayer, coat the bars of a stall. Because the electrostatic sprayer, that electrostatic procedure actually allows that disinfectant to be evenly spread around the bars. And so that is really helping you to protect that surface and disinfect that surface. And then Merck has a product called Amitrax, which is actually a long-lasting antimicrobial that actually can go on top as well of that surface of the stall, so that you have some type of a long-term protection of that stall after it's been cleaned and disinfected. So there's more information on their website, and on our website as one of the sponsors, you can get more information. I'm happy to chat more about either one of these products. And they do have membership special rates for USEF members. So with that, biosecurity for the win. And that's really my job security is here, because this is the future of helping our industry ensure competitions continue. And the only way we can do that is to prevent and respond quickly. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, and there's my contact for those of you that call Katie. So thank you for your time, and I'm